The Rhine River. Its shimmering waters nourish thriving vineyards, while from its shores, majestic castles lord over every twist and bend. Join us on a journey into Germany's rich medieval past. A voyage through legend on the world's most romantic river, the Rhine. Next on Great Castles of Europe. Formed by melting snowfields high in the Swiss Alps, the mighty Rhine carves an 800-mile channel through the heart of Europe. In the Low Countries, it rushes to the sea. Its name comes from the Celtic word for stream, a vast understatement of the romance and power of this mighty river. Writers from Goethe to Mark Twain have tried to capture the Rhine's epic spirit. In 1838, the French novelist Victor Hugo wrote that the Rhine combines everything, winding as the Seine, historic as the Tiber, royal as the Danube, covered with phantoms and fables like a river of Asia. But unlike rivers of any other region, the Rhine is studded with dozens of medieval castles, making it a showplace of antiquity, unequaled in the world. In the 50-mile stretch between Mainz and Koblenz, Germany, some 30 castles and ruins tower above the river's edge. Every bend and coil in the snaking waterway seems to reveal another. Rhine travelers not only get a journey through Europe's heart, but backwards through time itself. These spectacular vistas have survived virtually unchanged since the Middle Ages. By the 13th century, the Rhine had developed into a vital commercial waterway. Its shores were governed by noblemen and Catholic clergy, bitter rivals who fought over every inch of land, especially riverfront property. There, huge profits could be made by erecting toll stations and charging hefty fees for the safe passage of ships. The right to operate a toll castle could be awarded only by the regional lord or the German king, usually in exchange for money or political favors. Merchants had no choice but to pay the charge. Moving their cargo overland was a more dangerous and often deadly ordeal. Here at the city of Kaub, the Rhine narrows like an hourglass, making it an ideal spot for a toll castle. This ship-like fortress was erected by King Ludwig the Bavarian in 1326. He named it Pfalzgrafenstein. More lyrically, Victor Hugo would call it a stone ship eternally anchored at the face of the city. But in the 14th century, the powerful Catholic Church regularly shipped goods along the Rhine. They took a dimmer view. Pope John XXII condemned King Ludwig for new and severe impositions for those passing with goods. In 1327, the Bavarian king suffered the ultimate revenge. The Pope excommunicated him. Despite its jaunty nautical appearance, the castle Pfalzgrafenstein was built for extortion. No royal personage ever took residence here. Instead, a regiment of some 30 soldiers kept a round-the-clock vigil. Watchmen announced approaching ships by ringing a bell. The castle's toll rider would board each vessel, examine its cargo, and assess the toll. To keep boats from slipping by unchecked, a canal on the Rhine's east side forced them to pass next to the castle. For merchants trying to run the gauntlet, a watery grave awaited. Huge stones hurled from catapults rained down on them. Cannons aimed through gun ports could target every inch of the river. Here on the castle's west side, the Rhine is rocky. In addition, a heavy chain stretched across the river's width. Wayward ships stranded here were sitting ducks. The troops stationed at Pfalzgrafenstein did all their fighting from a distance. Their ranks were made of cripples and retirees. Accommodations in the castle were also second-rate. All walkways connecting the castle rooms are exposed to the elements. Garrison quarters inside are Spartan but functional. Built into a watchtower suspended over the Rhine, this rudimentary toilet empties straight into the water. The ship-like Volksgrafenstein heads ceaselessly into the current, but its seafaring design was only partly for show. 6 watchtowers add strength to its river-battered ramparts. Its bow continues to protect the toll castle from rising currents and ice flows even today. The Rhine's history is inextricably linked with the fruit for which it became famous. Succulent wine grapes probably grew wild in this valley long before mankind learned of their giddy magic. As early as the time of Christ, Rhine wine was shipped to discriminating consumers as far off as England and Scandinavia. In time, the nectar of the vine made this valley rich, or rather, it enriched those who owned the toll castles and vineyards. To further line their coffers, these rulers taxed the peasants who worked their fields. Commoners handed over the lion's share of everything they produced, a tariff usually paid in wine. As for the peasants, the wine they manufactured gave them cause to celebrate, socialize, and forget. Medieval peasant life often consisted of grueling poverty broken only by bloody wars. Relief came in the form of religion and a frequently raised goblet in the company of friends. The commoner's average wine consumption topped 4 liters a day. The popular intoxicant became the accepted payment for all river tolls. 1 barrel of wine was worth 16 pounds of garlic or grapes, or 6 baskets of fish. Its use as a standard of exchange accounts in part for Rhine wine's development into a thriving industry. As wine became the favorite currency of kings, castle wine cellars filled to overflowing. But with the frequent festivities and celebrations that characterized Rhine court life, these vast supplies quickly ran out again. In addition to fine wines, the Rhine gave birth to epics of heroism and valor. At a place called Dragon's Rock, the legendary Prince Siegfried used an enchanted sword to slay a fire-breathing beast. By bathing in the monster's blood, the prince became invincible. Wagner's famous opera, Ring of the Nibelung, immortalizes the hero, killed finally through the cunning of the jealous Queen Brunhild, who perished with him. To this day, the Lower Rhine's red wine bears the name Dragon's Blood. This region of the Rhine got its name from another tale of feminine guile and the supernatural. Here, the scenic Rhine curves sharply, and the swift current grows treacherous. Steep rocks jut skyward from the river's edge. Upon these rocks, according to legend, a woman of otherworldly beauty materialized each evening. Her name was Lorelei, and her sweet, plaintive song deafened boatmen to the river's thundering roar. When the men regained their senses, it was too late. They could no longer steer clear of the rocks, nor keep the jealous waves from swamping their boats. And the beautiful Lorelei, over the cries of drowning sailors, she continued her siren chanting until the morning sun chased off the night. Travel down the Rhine River today is a floating lesson in medieval rivalry. At every curve, another castle appears high atop the riverbanks. Each represents a landlord's claim to all the territory below. Two castles in particular illustrate the shifting balance of power that once characterized the mighty river region. The castle Teurenberg on the Rhine's east bank was built by the Archbishop of Trier around 1356. Not to be outdone by a churchman, his neighbors, the wealthy Counts von Katzenelnbogen, erected their own castle on the opposite hill. These powerful merchants were already the proud owners of 138 villages. Although they named their new prize the Burg nor Katzenelnbogen, it came to be known as the Burg Katz, or Cat's Castle. Predictably, the first castle, the Teurenberg, was then nicknamed Burg Maus, Mouse Castle. Thus, the antagonism between merchants of great wealth and the all-powerful Catholic Church resembled a game, a cat-and-mouse rivalry that continued through the ages. When they weren't baiting one another or pressing their vassals into service, the lords of the Rhine passed leisurely days with pleasant diversions. Favorite at the Burg Maus was hunting, using falcons and eagles, a blood sport that originated in the Orient. Survivors of the Crusades and well-traveled merchants like the Katzenelnbogen counts brought falcons and falconers to Europe and the British Isles. There, the sport thrived among the privileged classes. The quarry these eagles are after are pigeons and other small birds. On the winds of the twisting Rhine Valley, they will soar indefinitely before diving after prey or returning to their master's glove. Opposite the cat-and-mouse castles near the village of St. Goar lie the ruins of the once glorious and powerful Rheinfels castle. The Rheinfels was also constructed by the powerful Counts von Katzenelnbogen, who for years used it as their main residence. During an invasion by the French in the late 18th century, peasants with a centuries-old gripe against its owners burned it. A few miles downriver, on the east bank of the Rhine, a high, cone-shaped hill rises above the quiet hamlet of Braubach. The castle crowning the hill has an unusually slender keep, towering above its attendant courts and ramparts. While it is a massive and presumably easy target, this castle alone among the Rhine landmarks has remained unscathed by enemy attacks. This is the Marksburg. For stability, the Marksburg's walls are triangular and built so close to the hill's edge that in places it's hard to see where the rocks end and the walls begin. Old foundations reveal that the citadel began as a fortified tower, probably built by the 10th century Franks. The Roman-styled central tower was built about 200 years later. Subsequent owners of the Marksburg erected an additional defensive wall. Unlike other castles, the Marksburg has survived into the 20th century as more than a ruin or a romantic restoration. Despite additions in the 17th and 18th centuries, its medieval character has been magnificently preserved. The landlord who erected the main buildings in the 13th century was called Eberhard von Katzenelnbogen, another count from the family whose vast influence shaped the history of the Middle Rhine. A canny businessman and trader, he shared his prosperity with the city of Braubach. The castle gave the town much-needed employment and, most of all, protection. This vital function of all medieval castles was acknowledged throughout the continent by friend and foe alike. In a statement of détente between church and state, the Archbishop of Cologne wrote, "Our cities show that their life and belongings are linked with the decline of the castle." Count Eberhard's generosity at Marksburg was not purely one-sided. He could order Braubach workers to the castle whenever their services were needed. For Eberhard's court, access to the castle on horseback was a strict necessity. Because of their heavy armor, knights of the era couldn't dismount without help. Without armor, they weren't so encumbered. Marksburg's main entrance was carved out of the slate rock of the mountain itself. Rough-hewn steps prevented horses from slipping during rains. At the end of this stairway lies the Roman Palace, the castle's oldest building. Marksburg's central courtyard is remarkably narrow, crowded by the massive Roman tower at its center. Surrounding the courtyard is the Gothic palace built at the end of the 15th century. The palace's sharp roof is protected with slate, excavated for the castle's foundation. Under the castle's second tower lies the spacious Rittersaal, the Knights' Hall and main living room where official receptions took place. Here Count Eberhard entertained and plotted with the region's noblemen. The hall's massive wall is 10 feet thick, sturdy enough for even the most determined onslaught by catapult or cannon. Adjoining the Knights' Hall, inside the second tower, is a striking polygonal chapel spanned by groined vaulting in 10 sections. Colorful biblical scenes compete overhead with flattering portraits of knights. The chapel originally was constructed on the east side of the castle. Later it was moved to the castle's south side, its most vulnerable face. God, its builders reasoned, would protect his sanctuary. To help transfer the Holy Spirit to the new chapel site, these ceremonial heads were also moved. They represent the 7 deadly sins, expiated only through prayer. This portrait depicts St. Mark. He played a vital role in the legend that gave the fortress its name. Long ago, Elizabeth, a maiden of the castle, became secretly engaged to a knight called Sigbert. When Sigbert went to war on behalf of his king, Elizabeth waited for him, but in vain. Word came that in a gruesome battle, her beloved had been killed. In her grief, Elizabeth was comforted by a stalwart monk called Marcus. Soon a mysterious knight named Rochus appeared, asking for Elizabeth's hand. Reluctantly, she agreed to be wed, and the kingdom celebrated the nuptials, all except for the monk, Marcus. He was suspicious of the mysterious Rochus and prayed for guidance. On the night before the wedding, Marcus had a strange and disturbing vision. In a flash of blinding light, St. Mark the Apostle appeared. Giving Marcus a cross, he told the loyal monk that Rochus was the devil himself. He must be banished from the castle. In the morning, Rochus and Elizabeth were to come to the chapel. Marcus waited for just the right moment. The demon screamed. Beneath him, the earth opened wide. The Apostle Mark appeared once again to protect the mortals with a holy sword. Since that day, Schloss Braubach has borne the name of the saint, Marksburg. Centuries later, in 1937, St. Mark made another appearance at the castle. An American tourist paused to take a snapshot near a chapel window. When the film was developed, this ghostly portrait emerged. Perhaps it was the vigilant St. Mark still defending the Marksburg. In the 14th century, the already formidable influence of the von Katzenelnbogen family grew unchecked. Their toll castles choked the Rhine from Mainz to the Dutch border. The Marksburg was just one of dozens. Chief of the von Katzenelnbogen clan was Philip the Elderly, an adventurous, if aged, bon vivant. Even in his twilight years, he craved parties, the hunt, and adventure. Yet at home, Philip was locked in a stormy marriage to Anna von Württemberg. Perhaps this accounts for his far-ranging travels to exotic cities in Africa and China. Eventually, Philip sent Anna to one of his distant castles. Later, he divorced her. At the time, divorce was such a sensitive matter that the church reserved it for the rich and mighty. One of Philip's sons was murdered by a robber. The other succumbed to a mysterious disease. Philip, at 72, faced his life's greatest challenge, producing a new heir. He married once more to another Anna, this one from the von Braunschweig family. She was just 20 years old. But the union was fruitless, and when he died in 1479, there was no male von Katzenelnbogen to carry on the family name. His beloved castle Marksburg fell into the hands of his son-in-law, Heinrich von Hessen. But with their own castle far away, the von Hessens had only a fleeting interest in the Marksburg. They visited long enough to pay their respects to the fallen lord, then stripped the castle of its valuables, including Philip's extensive library and treasures of silver and gold. Still seeking profit in the majestic relic, they built an outer defensive wall and leased the castle as a troop garrison. No nobleman would ever live here again. Marksburg's years as a regal showplace had ended. An era had come to a close. The decline of all the great Rhine castles began in earnest shortly after, as the 16th century got underway. With the region shattered by wars, many castles were crippled or destroyed. Their once mighty ramparts and towers were no match for the explosive weapons of the frightening New Age. Yet perhaps due to its fearsome appearance and the knowledge that its new cannon batteries were trained constantly on the world below, the Marksburg was left in peace. Only recently, after more than 1,000 years unscathed, did the great castle endure its darkest moments. In 1945, while occupied by retreating German troops, it came under American grenade fire. Its wounds, however, were minor. Perhaps once more, St. Mark lent a hand in protecting the stronghold, leaving the greatest treasure of the Rhine intact to this day. Today, the Rhine region hosts adventurers of a different sort. Still proud castles are now home to hotels where travelers can bask in an era of knights, scoundrels, and legends. But the best views are still from the water. Boats navigate a course unchanged by time. Only the panorama changes, as the gently snaking valley reveals one treasure after another, and history is turned back by the ceaseless current of the Rhine.